I pledge allegiance
allegiance
to
to the flag of the
United
United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
and
under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay, well, this is new for me. I'm going to get used to this hybrid model. It's actually, we failed miserably in Placerville when we tried to do this. So we either have to do either or, either all online or all in person. We just don't have the right technology. So excuse me if if I miss something, just yell at me if you're a director or staff and I don't see you on the screen here. So we'll go ahead and jump right in with roll call, please. Or message first, excuse me.
Before roll call, just a few housekeeping announcements. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed over the internet. For members of the public viewing this meeting online, we accept and encourage public comment and have provided options that are listed at the top of this meeting agenda. For our staff and committee members attending in person today, SACOG has installed cameras in our boardroom, so you are on camera and visible to parties viewing this meeting online. If you are sharing microphones, please do not pick up or move the table mics that are in front of you. You can speak at a normal volume and the mics will transmit the audio through Zoom. Please do not access Zoom through your laptop device. Since you are here in person, there is no need for you to do that. For our committee members participating online, thank you for joining us today. Please mute your devices when you are not speaking and use the raise hand feature in Zoom should you wish to comment. All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bullhan. Here. Frost. Absent. Gallardo.
Yes.
Court.
Here.
Harris.
Yes.
There we go. Kennedy.
Here.
New.
Here.
West.
Here.
Vice Chair Baines. Absent. Vice Chair Clark-Kreitz.
Here.
And Chair Saragosa.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and move on. Robert, do we have any public communications?
There is no public comment.
All right, thank you. All right, moving right along, we'll move to our first item, which is our consent item, and that's approving the minutes of the March 3rd, 2022 meeting. Any questions on that?
I'll move approval. And I'll second.
All right, we have a first and a second. Any further comments? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Okay, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bullhan.
Aye.
Frost. Absent. Gallardo.
Yes.
Court.
Aye.
Harris.
Yes.
Kennedy.
Aye.
New.
Aye.
West.
Aye.
Vice Chair Baines. Absent. Vice Chair Clark-Kreitz.
Yes.
And Chair Saragosa.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. Moving right along, we have a quick agenda today. We'll start with our informational items. Item 2, which is an update on our regional housing related activities. And Greg has this item for us this afternoon. Thank you, Greg.
All right, thank you for having me. I just want to check, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We
Okay,
can.
good to know. Good to know, technology. So I'm here to just give you an update on just activities that are happening as it relates to all jurisdictions in the region. So these are just various activities that your jurisdictions are participating in that SACOG is having some sort of role in. So I'll just jump right off the bat. Last year in 2021, all of your jurisdictions adopted the housing elements. This cycle, the Housing Community Development Department was a bit harder on what they allowed to pass and not pass as far as being compliant. So jurisdictions, as many as 11 jurisdictions received letters saying you're not compliant. Of those, a couple of those were just relatively really small things and they fixed up pretty quickly. So we have 9 jurisdictions that were still considered non-compliant. And we've talked to them individually about what their issues are and whether or not there's some sort of support that SACOG could provide. 5 of those said, yes, there's actually a role that we could play, and specifically is to provide them technical assistance from really specialized consultants. So back in January, this committee and the board approved us utilizing some underused grants or unused grants from local jurisdictions, and we channeled that towards housing jurisdictions that requested assistance. So out of the 9 remaining, almost all of them said that they will be adopting before May 15th of this year. That's 1 year past the period when they were originally due. So that's a significant timeline. And the jurisdictions, most of them are very confident that they will receive compliance based on their communications with the Housing Community Development Department, as well as just the comments that they received were, in their belief, pretty doable. So, and we've set forward our consultant, Ascent Environmental Consulting, to provide the assistance with them. So for the most part, that's on track. There is one hiccup. There was a bill that passed. I won't go into the details, but it passed after the housing elements were due in May of last year, plus the 120 days. This legislative bill 1398, Assembly Bill 1398 passed, and it requires, it's about what happens if you don't make the timeline. There's lots of legal interpretations. We've had discussions with the state about this and whether or not it applies to us. Regardless, we're just telling jurisdictions, just get your housing adopted as soon as, with the revisions, as soon as possible. For those jurisdictions that may be affected by this bill and what it means to them, we've been working with them directly. But that is our highest priority as far as services to jurisdictions in the region. So that's the first of 5 things I want to talk about. The second is the regional housing.
I'm going to interrupt real fast and just say from Placerville, we're one of those jurisdictions, and just have to say staff wants to pass along their thanks. The consultants have been a great help to us, and so we really appreciate the assistance.
Oh, good. Thanks for the feedback. Yeah, your staff has been terrific in terms of helping the consultants and providing the information that they need. So I think we have a clear path for Placerville, as well as almost all the other jurisdictions. The second thing I want to talk about is the Regional Early Action Plan grants, or REAP, and this is REAP 1. So this is, we received these monies. We received notice that we're receiving $6.8 million through the Housing Community Development Department. This is the first of 2 REAP grants that we're receiving. So the $6.8 million, we've been to this committee and the board in the past, but just to reiterate, all these monies are intended to be used towards housing related activities. That's a high priority in the state. And these grants, the vast majority of that money, 93% of it, is all going to grants to local government. So every local government received at least 2 grants. So there's 28 community or 28 jurisdictions times 2 grants. Plus we gave out another 6 or 7 grants in competitive grants, plus another 5 in jurisdictions that participated in our CIVGLAG program. So we have almost 70 grants that we've given out to the region. And with those, each one of them has to be customized to the specific thing that the jurisdiction is looking to work on, scope of work, consultant. So we think we have some good projects. Some have to do with accessory dwelling units. Some have to do with rezoning zoning codes and the development processes. Others have to do with analyzing certain corridors for housing opportunities. There's a variety of different things that are going on. Specific plans are very common as well from the jurisdictions. They're all using the monies and they have until July of 2023 to use them. Almost everybody's got a signed MOU and has been working on that. One of the things that we did at SACOG was we also pre-sorted and pre-selected consultants. And if they met certain qualifications and they were put on a bench, and jurisdictions would not have to do their own procurement and bid and all the rest, they could just draw off the SACOG bench. It saved them a lot of time. And that's a model that proved to be very popular, and jurisdictions have asked for that for the second round of REAP grants that we're about to give. So Anyway, those projects, if you need any updates on specifically what's going on in your jurisdiction, feel free to contact me, but your housing staff should be talking to your local bodies about specifically what's going on with that. So that's the REAP 1 grant from 2019. We're also getting a second grant, which you're familiar with. The state's calling it REAP 2, or at least that's the common name throughout the state. We've rebranded that as our Green Means Go program. That's $34 million between a couple of different sources. And that money, those monies will be used to help jurisdictions to provide non-transportation infrastructure towards activities that will lead to housing and infill. So you'll hear more about that in the next coming months from the Green Means Go team led by Garrett Ballard-Rosa. And what the programs are for that, as well as how the funding cycle will work as far as applications and awards and so forth. The fourth category of things that's happening is what's called the pro-housing. So, you know, I mentioned earlier the housing element and kind of a punitive, what happens if you don't make it. This is something the state wants to do fresh off the housing elements being adopted. If you can document through the state's pro-housing program where you show that you have various activities related to housing, they have different categories such as zoning and guidelines and different activities towards promoting housing, and you make enough points, you need a total of 30 points. If you can demonstrate that through the state's guidelines, then your jurisdiction would be bumped up. You would get bonus points, not just for housing programs, which you would expect. So anything that the Housing Community Development Department has as far as housing grants, but your jurisdictions would also get bonus points for transportation projects. Senate Bill 1 funds specifically, there's currently 6 state funding programs that have already built that in, is you get bonus points if your jurisdiction has received the pro-housing designation, even though they're pure transportation projects. And then there's another 6 that are pending, but they've already been written into the guidelines. It's just once the guidelines are approved for transportation-related projects or transportation-related grants that would go to your jurisdiction. So we've sent out a notice to not just the housing planners in the region, but also the public works directors in the region as well. So we hope to get more activity. The city of Sacramento was the first in the state to receive the designation. And then a couple of other jurisdictions have submitted, and we're talking to a few more that are looking to submit for their designation. So that's pro-housing. And the last thing, I'll be glad to take any questions. Yeah.
On pro-housing, is there a timeline for municipality or jurisdiction to receive that designation? Or is it just ongoing?
There's no strict timeline. They're taking them right now. They're taking what's called over the counter. You could submit it right now, and if you're short, they'll let you know why, and then it'll go until the funding programs either run out of money or they have another cycle. But there's nothing to stop a jurisdiction right now. Back in November, we did a workshop for all the jurisdictions on the pro-housing, what's involved. So they opened up the application at any time. And again, the city of Sacramento was the first in line to submit and the first in line to receive the designation. Others are working on it. You know, they had just finished their housing. In most cases, everybody's done with their housing elements, so they can just convert that into this point system with some documentation, and then they would have a good chance. HCD is willing to work one-on-one with them, and we've been there as well. Jurisdiction.
Thank you.
The final category is there's other grant programs that are happening that your jurisdictions are aware of, but not tracking what's going on individually with them, and they change. These are ongoing state programs. The two most prominent are the AHSC, or the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Grants, and that's for specific development projects that have affordable housing components, depending on the nature of your jurisdiction, whether or not you're rural, suburban, or an urban area. You compete against others in that category. The region has done well recently in that program, but the guidelines are constantly changing with each cycle. So we're tracking that, and we're trying to make an argument that this region deserves more than it has been getting in the past. So same with another program called the Infill Infrastructure Grant. That's exactly what it sounds like. That's very similar to our Green Means Go program. Is if you're looking for infrastructure for a housing project that happens to be infill, then that money would pay for the infrastructure portion of that. And again, those guidelines are evolving right now, but the state is looking to release those programs later this year, and we've been tracking those. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions about any housing activities.
All right, thank you, Greg. Do you have any questions from directors, comments? See,
Chair, just real
Yes.
quick, just something I wanted to mention. You had mentioned some interest in one of our check-ins about maybe having some of the folks that have had success with the AHSC program come and learn more about those projects. And Greg is going to be working to see if we can't have a special visit from a couple of the jurisdictions that have had success, maybe in May or June for this committee.
that'd be great.
So that's something that we'll definitely bring back.
Awesome. Love to hear that. Yeah, I think it's always nice to see what they did and how they did it, and see if it applies to our jurisdiction. So thank you for that.
And may I ask a question? There was, I think you said, Greg, a meeting back in November where you shared how to do this. That's recorded, that's online, correct? Or is it?
Yes, that's for, that is on our SACOG website, and jurisdictions have access to that. Yes.
Great, that's helpful, because if we get an update, then we know who to point, where to point our teams back to, so that's helpful, thanks.
That Bonnie. On the, on the Green Means Go dollars, I think we talked about this last time, but those we're looking at early summer. Is that, Clint, is that where we were at in terms of those first dollars coming out? Or late summer?
I believe we're coming back next month with, to get some input from you all on the guidelines. And then we do want to see if, like late summer, we can get a first tranche of funding out, because there's some things that I think we can move on quickly, and there's a really tight turnaround time. And we're trying to use these projects for this funding for some capital projects, but we need to be finished, all spent and done by, I think, July of 26. That's a fast turnaround time if you're talking construction.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure we got some out this as quickly as we can later this summer into the fall. And then there'd probably be a second tranche, a larger tranche that would come out early in 23. But guidelines, I think we should be asking for adoption or info in May, feedback in May, and I think we're doing back in June. Is our plan?
And did the state release those planning dollars, that first, whatever it was, 4 million or so? Or did you get that?
Yeah. So that was, so we've got 38 million total. 34 million is coming out of HCD, and that's in 2 different funding sources that HCD is using. And then we got an additional 4 million from SGC. That 4 million will be part of that initial tranche. It's a little bit more flexible for us.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? All right.
Just a
Yes.
comment.
Yes.
I just want to say that I can hear Greg and Robert. I can hear them fine. When the board is talking, it's a little bit echoey. So if you can, I don't know if the mics are right in front of you or not, but if you can talk more into them, that would help a little. Thank you.
Sounds good. Okay. We're figuring it out, so thanks, Pierre.
Okay.
All right, well, great. Thank you very much for the presentation and for the update, and more to come. So we will go ahead and move on to item 3, and that is our air quality conformity and the year ahead. And Renee has this for us this afternoon. Thank you,
All
Renee.
right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I'm going to pause for a second. All right, are you seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay,
We are.
Excellent. Okay. Everything moved. Hold on. I'm in a different spot, so everything kind of shifted over on me. Okay. Let me go to the next slide. So, all right. So this is an information item today with the intent of helping prepare you for future committee items that are coming later this year, both here at SACOG as well as some of your air district boards, which I know a few of you are sitting on those. So I'm your program manager for regional air quality and climate planning here on staff. David Yang is joining me from the Sac Metro Air Quality Management District today. And so he is the program supervisor over there who is responsible for coordinating and developing some of these air quality plans, which we call SIPs. I'm trying to walk you through to get you acclimated to some of the acronyms that we use, as well as some of the language that comes along with air quality planning. Move on to the next slide. Apologies here. So what we're covering here today is the connection between air quality and transportation planning, as well as conformity, as well as upcoming activities in the region. So what we're going to be focusing on today here is criteria pollutants, for which there are national ambient air quality standards, or NAAQS. Those are one of our first acronyms there. These are all activities that we have special designations and criteria that we follow as a result of being an MPO as well as an air district. So our specific focus here today is going to be on-road mobile or tailpipe emissions. And so David will help set up the context for this global air district challenge, as well as what we're doing here at the region. So moving on to the next slide.
Hey, as you move on, I'm gonna ask staff in here, I'm having a hard time hearing. It feels like the volume should just be a little bit louder. So if there's a way we can do that in here,
Turn it up.
yeah, that'd be great, thanks.
I'll see if I move my microphone a little closer. So today's item is to give you a look ahead at coordination activities that we'll be doing with the air districts in the region, and how these activities fit with our day-to-day work here at SACOG, especially as we begin efforts to update our SACOG MTP, or blueprint that we're calling it this year, and our programming and funding implementation documents called the MTIPs. So there's terms that you're going to learn here today, which are transportation planning. So you're very familiar with this. This is what we're doing with our 2024 blueprint. You also hear the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, or MTIP. And so this is our federal funding implementation document that captures funding that's going to be spent in the region over the next 4 years. And then we've got air quality planning. So this is a phrase that's most associated with our air district partners and their development and implementation of state implementation plans. And this is required by state and federal law. And then another term that you're hearing is this word called conformity, which in its simplest form is really an analytical exercise that's done at specific points in times and processes to ensure that there's consistency between our transportation and air quality planning efforts. So to help frame this Air Quality 101 presentation today, I'm going to hand it over to David, who's going to talk about the overall issues that are facing our region on air quality. And then we will transition over to the application of this to SACOG activities. And so, whoops, that went back. There we go. All right, so handing it over to you, David.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Renee. So to start, to talk about the State Implementation Plan, or SIP as we call it, I want to first talk about the region's air quality status with respect to the federal health standards. Like Renee mentions, it's known as the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. So the Clean Air Act requires EPA to set federal health standards for 6 criteria pollutant based on the latest science and information. For the Sacramento region, we currently do not meet the federal health standards for ozone and fine particulate matter, or PM2.5, and are classified as non-attainment areas. So depending on which standard, the non-attainment consists of Sacramento County and the surrounding counties, as can be seen on the map. As a non-attainment area, the region will need to show how we can meet the standard by a specific deadline, and that is demonstrated through the SIP, or State Implementation Plan. Currently, we are working on developing the SIP or the 2015 ozone standard. And I'll touch upon that a little bit more later on. Next slide, please. So the SIP is our roadmap to show how and when the region can meet the standard. The SIP is developed through a collaborative process between many partners, including the air districts, SACOG, the Air Resources Board, and EPA. The SIP shows where we are, which is determined by the air quality data from our air monitoring stations, and also the current emission inventory, which tells us where the pollution is coming from. So how much is it coming from the cars, trucks, businesses, and other emission sources. In the SIP, we also look at future years emission inventory based on growth factors and how the emission sources are affected by the rules and regulations that are currently in place. And we take that data and the emission inventory and run that through a model. That model tells us if we can attain the standard by the deadline. If we can, then we don't need to look at any additional control measure, control strategies to meet the standard. But if the model shows otherwise, then we'll need to find those reductions and be looking at all available control strategies or measures from all sectors. So for the air districts, we'll be looking at station source control measures. These are station sources are just your businesses. For SACOG, they'll be looking at transportation control measures. And once we do that evaluation and determine which measures we need to help reach attainment, we'll commit to those measures into the plan. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the emission inventory for ozone precursor emissions or nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds. So for ozone, we focus on these emissions because NOx and VOCs in the presence of sunlight form ozone through a chemical reaction. So the pie chart shows that mobile sources plays a large role to our ozone pollution problem in the Sacramento region. So the SIP must ensure that transportation activities or projects do not cause or contribute to any new violation of the standard or delay the timely attainment of a standard. So this is known as the as transportation conformity, and the SIP establishes motor vehicle emission budgets or the upper emission caps allow for transportation projects where the transportation plan uses them to show conformity. And this conformity work is done in coordination with SACOG. And so with that, I will pass it back to Renee to talk more about control measures and emission budget and conformity.
Mr. Chair, can I just?
Yes.
We were all trying to get the pie charts because we couldn't see it on the screen. So I'm just ask you to clarify again. Okay, so we have the NOx and the VOC, and what did the V stand for?
VOCs are for volatile organic compounds.
Volatile organic compounds. Got it. That's helpful. And so primarily for the NOx, NOx, right? It's the mobile. It's vehicles, right? Okay.
Yes.
And so we're having to address that, and then the VOC. What's the biggest one? Like mobile. So when you're focusing on this plan for the VOCs, what's the biggest impact? Because it looks like they're a lot fairly equal.
Yeah, so when we're looking at for because our region is in non-attainment for the ozone standard, we are actually looking at both because ozone is formed through a mixture of NOx and VOC and in present sunlight. So to reduce ozone formation, we look at reducing these precursors. So it's really looking at both pies. So for NOx, it's a lot of it is from mobile sources, on-road and off-road, and other mobile sources. And then for VOCs, it's more there's a large portion of the pie that comes from mobile sources.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll go ahead and transition onto kind of the next portion of this. So I'm going to walk through 3 activities that we'll be doing over the next 2 years, this year and next year. So 2 of these are with the districts, and the last 2 are kind of part of our ongoing processes of work here at SACOG. So David mentioned kind of 2 components there where we collaborate on SIP development processes. So the first one that I'm going to go over is this acronym RACM, or Reasonably Available Control Measures. So depending on the type of the plan that the air district's going to develop, there could be a need to look at more reasonably available control measures. So with the RACM analysis at SACOG, we have to do a deeper dive to look at our transportation control measures in combination with other measures that the air districts are doing to see if what we can do can help improve the air on a more rapid basis or get the air cleaner sooner. So there's some parameters that are set up for this type of analysis in the Clean Air Act. And so what we're looking at, is it reasonable? Are these measures implementable, and can they collectively move up attainment by a year? So this may be a process that we need to do because we're waiting to see kind of how all this modeling pans out for the air districts coming from CARB. And so we'll know if we're going to be doing that, but just kind of a good base level of kind of look at what we've done in the past is on the screen you see Spare the Air. So this is a control measure that we've actually been in place since 2008. It's funded by SACOG, EDCTC, and PCPTA as part of our funding round program CMAQ funds. It helps target emissions on the most polluted days based off of forecasting. And also, you're probably familiar with it during some of the fire seasons we've seen where it's helping to get out the information related to smoke and air quality at that time. So as I mentioned, so this will be a component of work that we'll be returning to a little bit later in the year to evaluate what else is out there in terms of transportation control measures and taking another closer look at Spare the Air. So the other component that we collaborate on is the development of vehicle emission budgets. So in that pie, you saw that there's automobiles and trucks, so a portion of those are ours. And so emission budgets are really the upper limit on how much emissions can come from the transportation sector at key points in time as the region is looking to try to meet attainment. And we do that in line with the air quality plans that the districts are developing. So budgets are really caps. And David noted we're working on the development of a new plan. So right now we're at this process where we are getting information and sharing it with CARB. And we pulled our data from the most recently approved data. So we're looking at our 2020 MTP SES, and we hand that over to CARB. And they cross-check this against their own models. And they look at the air quality readings. And they also do a little bit of a look ahead in combination with other forecasts that are happening with our plan as well as the district's plan. And they use this to develop transportation conformity budgets, which we use in our processes, and they are actually housed over in the air quality document that known as the SIP. So we're probably at that second component right now where CARB is going through and kind of doing the net analysis portion. And when we get budgets, they'll come back and they'll make their way through our committee process. And if you're interested in following that kind of more closely, we have our regional planning partnership, which is our interagency consultation body, where we speak with CARB as well as our federal partners and kind of setting the conversational base for some of the technical work that we're doing. Move on to our next slide. Oops, there we go. So the RACM work and the budget development work are really items that are tied to our new planning activities for meeting that new health standard. And then what's happening this year is that we still have to continue to show that we're demonstrating hitting already approved standards. So like David noted on that map slide, we have a 2008 ozone standard that we're still having to demonstrate that we are slowly making our way to achieving cleaner air quality. We also need to do that for particulate matter or PM10 and PM 2.5, which is kind of a smaller version of that. And so currently, we are working with your staff on the development of the 2023 MTIP. And so as I noted, this is the document that houses our funding or programming for near-term transportation projects that are going to be receiving federal and state dollars. And we also look to see if there's any projects that are related to impacts on air quality. So there's terms for those called exempt and non-exempt. But really are these going to have an influence on potentially making air quality better or worse? And so the MTIP is actually required to update every 2 years. We do this in tandem with all the other MPOs in the state. This document will go out for review in the summer and return to our transportation committee for action and also board approval in September timeline. And so important to this update of the dollars is that we also continue to look through and refine our open to traffic dates, which is where conformity comes in. And so when the MTIP goes out for public review, the conformity also goes out, and then the action that the board will take will be on both documents as well. Similarly, you've been hearing a lot about our 2024 blueprint. And so we actually have an active call for projects out for that with your staff. And there's a tool component that's available where you can go in and nominate and type in all the information related to transportation projects that you're looking at. And so as those come in, those will be developed, and that'll have a little bit of a later time frame because that gets approved after the MTP or 2023 MTIP. And so that will probably be coming back in the year 2023. And so our MTP is updated on a 4-year cycle, whereas our MTIP is updated on a 2-year cycle. And so you don't see conformities going through very often. That's really because it takes 7 to 8 months to process all these changes, because we have to collect the projects that are changing, scopes that are changing, do the modeling, and make sure that we're hitting all these critical steps that happen along the way. And then I did note that our analysis does look at multiple milestones. So we have to, with your greenhouse gas analysis, you're kind of looking at 2 kind of cross points. With conformity, we are really looking at probably about 7 milestones at this point. So some of those will be coming forward in a little and later in this committee cycle. And so to wrap this up, this is the list of activities that you'll be in air quality related activities that you'll be seeing in 2022 and 2023. So you'll be seeing more information related to the 2020 or the 2015 ozone standards. So that's those vehicle emission budgets that we're going to be developing. Potentially a reasonably available control measure analysis, looking at if there anything else that the transportation sector can do to improve air quality sooner. And then our conformities for the 2023 MTIP, as well as the conformity for the 2024 blueprint. And so I realized that was a lot of information and a lot of acronyms, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And we have David here if you have questions that fall on the kind of the other side of the district portion of the fence.
Great. Thank you, Renee, and David, thank you for joining us today too for this presentation. Appreciate it. Directors, any questions or comments? Yeah, there's a lot. One thing, I always get to learn new acronyms, so that's one thing right off the bat. I had a question on, so as we built the plan and we try to hit our GHG targets, how do we plan for like a sales tax measure? I'm just thinking like we've had one in Placerville and might potentially change the layout of the streets. I mean, how does, when you're doing that, and I'm thinking like like on regional scales, how do those play into conformity, or how do we score those as we look at potentially significant changes to a transportation plan, either in a municipality or over a region?
Renee, do you want me to?
I would say, why don't you go ahead, Clint?
So one of the challenges, so when it comes to conformity, it's not going to just be projects that are federally or state funded. So any project that has an impact on air quality, we would consider regionally significant. So it could be fully locally funded out of a local sales tax and measure, still subject to our greenhouse gas analysis and our air quality analysis. One of the challenges you run into is our plan goes 20 or 30 years in the future. Your sales tax measure most frequently is going to go longer than that. The really important part we need to work on, and we'll be working on and bringing you information on this, is our long range plan, our blueprint phases those projects, right? So you may have a 40-year expenditure plan or whatever it is for your sales tax measure. We need to understand what's coming in kind of in these, Renee was calling them milestone years. Those aren't like every 5 years you have a milestone. Sometimes you've got, 22, 3, 4, and then you wait until 27, you've got another one. So we just need to understand open to traffic dates for those transportation projects so that we can see how they nest into our overarching strategy, which is so what we're looking at is how are they gonna interact with the land uses that we're forecasting and the travel demand that we're forecasting? And is that going to push us over or keep us under budget? On the air quality conformity side, vehicle technology helps us quite a bit as you get further and further away from today, right? Because you're talking about tailpipe emissions. But for particulate matter, it's not so much tailpipe emissions, it's driving on the roads, you're kicking up dust. That's where a lot of our particulate comes from. I don't know if that's causing the 2.5, but a lot of it comes from there. On greenhouse gas, its technology doesn't help us as much because we're responsible for the portion that comes out of vehicle miles traveled. So even as you're starting to see more electric vehicles, we still have kind of what is essentially a bit of a vehicle miles travel target, so you don't take as much credit. The state has a multi-pronged approach. They're in charge mostly on the electric vehicle side. We could do some things that we can go above and beyond the state to capture those impacts, but generally we're more on the PMT side when it comes to the greenhouse gas. But specifically with sales tax measures, the phasing of those really matters, as well as, it's a local sales tax measure. Is it consistent with the regional plan? It's another back and forth we would need to have.
Understood. Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments?
Just a quick comment. Thank you for the presentation. That was really good. But we had 9 months of COVID during 2020, and that's the year we're going to measure, which hopefully that'll help us out a little bit. A few less vehicles out on the road. So.
Yeah, and in the pie charts, they were kind of hard to see, but you can see it, like especially for the volatile organic compounds. You're asking what are the big sources? A lot of the big sources for those are like consumer products, like your scented things that you spray at home. That's a big source of volatile organic compounds. So it's not, so when we're talking about this, yes, what's that?
No more deodorant?
No more deodorant. So some of the transportation side, you might see an improvement of that, but it's one part of a large pie, and not all of that slowed down during COVID, but certainly some of it did.
Well, on the NOx side, we see it's like 50%.
Right.
Really? So can I ask a question, right? So when we did Green Means Go, right, the idea was that we couldn't hit our 19%, or we couldn't hit our 19%, right? So we need additional funding to hit our 19%,
help us get there.
right? So now we're gonna redo the plan, that's the 2024, okay? So maybe we'll get closer based on what's happened in the last couple of years, right? But that number will change again as we do the plan for 2024, correct?
The 19%, we may have the same target, but we're operating, a few years later, different forecasts, and a lot less population growth we're forecasting. So yes, it will absolutely
So we'll
change.
still have the 19%, but before we couldn't meet it, and we needed to have additional measures to help us do that.
Yeah.
We may or may not get closer depending on what the study shows us.
Yeah.
Okay.
We still, I think one thing we can say with certainty, we still need Green Means Go funding to achieve the land use assumptions that we've got backing up our plans.
Okay.
We still need that. It's gonna be, if we're gonna get to that 19% in the 2024 plan, we're gonna need to be able to find a way to unlock infill areas that still just don't pencil all the time. So the need for Green Means Go funding beyond the 38 million that we got. The 38 million is a bit of a down payment. We need a lot more than that to get us there.
Okay, any questions from colleagues online? Or questions? Seeing none, all right. So again, Renee, David, thank you very much for the presentation today. Something for us all to keep an eye on, and certainly as we look at our plans that they meet all of these goals. Because I would assume the downside of not meeting these goals are us being restricted from state funding, other funding sources, if we fail to meet these, these levels.
Yeah, that's actually a really important point. So there are certain, if we don't hit our greenhouse gas target, SB1 funding programs, we either can't compete for them, or we lack competitiveness for them. When it comes to air quality conformity, we have to meet our air quality conformity. If we don't, we're not spending even our local money on things, right? So that is absolutely have to meet our air quality targets. The greenhouse gas, I would say we still absolutely need to meet it because we need that access to that SB1 funding, but it's a little less kind of universally catastrophic.
Understood. Okay, thank you. All right, so moving along, we move to item 4, which is our draft regional trail network and prioritization framework. And Ms. Cacciatore has this one for us today. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm happy to be here to share the latest with the Regional Parks and Trails Strategic Development Plan, specifically the draft final regional trail network and the prioritization framework. So if I may turn on. All right. So a quick recap. This is this is the vision for our dynamic system of interconnected trails and parks across El Dorado, Placer, Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. So want to see where we are on that that process of envisioning the network and what we can do to continue forward and complete the next needed steps. So there are many reasons that our region is interested in a connected trail network. There's going to be a stronger potential to decrease vehicle miles traveled and the associated greenhouse gas emissions with those if you have a network that people can use as a viable alternative for motorized vehicle trips. And we also know that health metrics improve when you have better access to trails and open space. And we also know that in our region, in our state, across the nation, that disadvantaged community residents often have less access to trails and parks, which means that they are going to miss out on all of those benefits that we just talked about. And lastly, we know that this is a really good way to define our region through transportation and lever that to increase quality of life. As you could tell by which facility you might be more supportive of having behind where you live. Would you rather the abandoned rail corridor, or would you rather the trail corridor that can support your neighbors getting out for a quick walk at lunchtime or taking their kids out to learn how to ride a bike for the first time, in addition to just aesthetically being a much more beautiful place. So first part of this, the draft final trail network. So after the board released the draft trail network in December, SACOG staff used that time to first gather public comments through early February to share the draft network that we'd been able to identify with cities and counties, share that with our broader range of non-jurisdictional partners so they could help us find weaknesses in the draft network and where we were missing opportunities to meet regional goals. And then after gathering that input, having one-on-one meetings with local agency staff to resolve these comments to the best of their ability and figure out how to fill in some of the gaps that we still had in the network. And that brings us to the draft final network that we have today, which you'll see it's not every planned trail in the region and it's not every existing trail. The network is focused on access to destinations that were identified by local staff and partners, and then also through the local plan review. And there's also a strong focus on the potential to cross barriers and jurisdictional boundaries. So on this map in green, you'll see the regional trail network, both the existing and the planned segments. There's about 270 miles of existing paved trails that are open and ready for use as part of this network today. And there's also about an existing 25 miles of informal trails, also totally ready for you to use today. In the packet and in the staff report, there's a link to an online map where you can see some of the distinctions between the existing and the planned trails, and whether it's an informal trail or whether it's a paved trail. But back to this map. We have close to 400 miles of planned regional trail network connections. Those are brought up from local planning documents. And then we also have about 170 miles worth of planned informal trails. At this point, they're not planned to be paved at any point in time, but most frequently those informal trail recommendations are sourced from Parks and Trails plans, and it is considered probably the most context appropriate approach to use for having a trail in those areas. In blue on this map, you'll see that we have the trail study corridors. So this is brought forward largely from the last or the draft network that we had released, but we have many more of them now. These are complex or sensitive projects that have some serious delivery obstacles. So questions about whether or not they could be built as they were originally envisioned. It also includes future planning areas and corridor studies and other high concept connections that need to go through a more rigorous local planning analysis before you can really give a thumbs up or thumbs down about are they feasible. So we have a little over 300 miles of the trail study corridors, and within that, 50 miles of those are identified as possible separated bikeways or bike lanes. So what are commonly called class 4s if you're using the Caltrans lingo. So it's a bikeway within the road that has some kind of a physical separation, usually a vertical separation or other grade separation that keeps the people who are biking on that area physically separated with a barrier from the people driving on that road. And then we also have 7 different locally identified study areas that are going to be key to making the remaining kind of tricky connections where there's definitely a local recognition that a connection needs to be made through these areas, but they're not sure about what the best way would be to do it. And that covers about 15.5 square miles. I'd also like to note that there are fewer than 10 miles of on-road low stress connections across the 6-county region. We know that there are more low stress on-road connections that have the ability to really serve local needs that well, or serve local needs very well, but it's not the focus of this plan and the effort to connect all of the regions by, or the communities in the region by trail. So in attachment B, we have the network performance metrics that we used these to measure progress towards the goals that were identified from the analysis of close to 80 local trails and active modes plans, and then further shaped by the spring 2021 public survey about where people wanted to connect to by trails and uncovering the different values that were important to them. So on this slide, there are 3 categories that we easily trounced our goals. We wanted to identify 30 miles of parallel trail connections that would allow people to avoid having to bike or walk on stressful roadways. So where the speeds are high or there's a lot of people driving. And we were able to identify over 100 miles of trails that would provide those all ages and abilities connections. Under economic vitality, we wanted to connect to gathering centers around, or like social gathering places around all 6 counties, and then also to connect to significant parks and open space. So on the map, you'll see that we have connections to Deer Creek Hills in Sacramento County. We have Feather River Parkway within Sutter County, Yuba Goldfields within Yuba County. We have access to different state recreation areas, downtowns and smaller cities, downtowns and larger cities. All across the board, you have a lot of destination access that'll be of value to the people living in our region. And we also wanted to double the mileage of trails that would be able to connect you to landmark geographic features such as the waterways, mountains, and regionally significant parks. And we more than doubled that. We, if I'm recalling correctly, possibly tripled. So while those are great to share, we had a harder time reaching some of these others in that when we are looking for safety, we also wanted to identify 30 miles of parallel trail connections that would help people avoid high crash roadways. Using trails alone, we were able to identify 25 miles of those connections, so not quite 30. However, when you pull in the study corridors that I mentioned before, you're able to exceed the 30-mile threshold, and there's a really strong potential of this network to help people avoid the roadways where people biking and walking are struck by people driving cars, and other dangerous roadways that are identified in Vision Zero plans or in local systemic safety plans. For health, we had wanted to have an increase in access of 20% of the population. And what we found is that with the trail networks, with the trail study corridors, we're able to increase access to 406,000 people who today, with the longer trails that exist, do not have access to trails. But that is 17% of our region's population. We know that this is something we can keep reaching for. The study areas that I mentioned earlier have the potential to add an additional 30,000 people into being able to access the regional trail network, assuming that the local agencies are going to be able to figure out how they can move that or those areas forward and make the connections that would help complete this regional network. So we will continue to reach for that. I guess I'd also note that we used our existing population information. So we don't fully know as the region continues to increase in density, and then also have more places that are being used to increase the number of dwelling units in the region. We might be, I would wager that we will have a higher number since we won't always be dealing with our 2016 population numbers. And within environmental justice, we had known at the onset of this plan that residents of lower income communities were 30% less likely to have a connecting trail near them within a half mile where they may be able to easily access it. We're able to almost completely eliminate that disparity. If we pull out the decimal a little bit, you'll see it's 46.3% versus 46.9%. But I think even with rounding being what it is, I have to acknowledge that we're just 1% away from having complete parity in trail access. So that would conclude the first part, the discussion of the trail network, which is a really great place for me to pause and see if there are any questions.
Thank you. I'll turn that off. All right, thank you, Victoria. Any questions or comments? Yes.
So Victoria, can you explain low stress versus high stress roads? Can you define that a little better for me?
Yeah, so low stress roadways is taken from different transportation analyses that talk about how the speeds of people driving past you and how the number of people driving past you is going to impact the way that you feel traveling on that roadway if you're biking or walking. So what you would typically see is that as your traffic volumes increase and as your speeds increase, you have a facility that fewer and fewer people are willing to use because they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel safe. Even if there aren't recorded crashes on that roadway, they feel like a crash is imminent, so they just avoid it out of a sense of self-preservation. This comes into play when we talk about how we want to create a trail network that people of all ages and abilities are going to feel comfortable using. So something where you could take your 10-year-old nephew who's in town visiting out on this facility, or you could take your aunt who's getting on older in her years, but she still wants to go out for a walk. So the facilities that are going to be welcoming to them. So I don't know if that completely addresses your question, but I'm hoping that it helps to explain the transportation understanding of low stress roadways.
Well, I can relate because the town of Loomis has a lot of rural roads that you feel very stressful when you're on them because there's absolutely no way to enjoy yourself out there. So yeah, I get it. Thanks.
Totally understand that. Same in Placerville is, there's some streets you really don't want to be walking on because unless you're walking maybe the opposite way, so you can at least see if the car is coming towards you. I had a question because I thought it was really great that, we went to almost parity on sort of the EJ side of things in terms of bringing that parity to access. And then that we were, at 17% versus that, we have like a 3% stretch we still need to go to get to that 20% that we were looking at. Victoria, would you say that where we're still sort of missing, is that still in what I would consider urban corridors, or is that more in rural areas, or is it sort of spread out? Because I'm envisioning like Director Frost's district that, just has really long boulevards and, mature neighborhoods that didn't just have the infrastructure that today we're more cognizant of as we build up housing.
I think that many of those are going to be in your more built out areas. We were looking at class 4 separated bikeways for a way to increase access for residents in built out communities where there weren't any opportunities for trails to connect into the network. But what we've seen across the region is that there's not as much of there's not a fully connected network of planned separated bikeways that are going to allow you to get from point A to point B. Many of the ones that we have in place are part of highly focused efforts to work on that specific roadway, but they don't quite get you to a network of other class 4s, and they don't connect to the trail network. So while there are a number of different planned class 4s in the region, I think that we'll have to look at the ways that we could have a regional discussion about how they can connect for longer segments.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? Anybody? Stretching my head here to see if I see anybody online there. Seeing none. All right. Well, Victoria, thank you again for
She's
the.
not done.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
Thank you for having my back on that. All right. So yes, there is a second part, but it is shorter than the first. It's the overview of the prioritization framework. And I'll note that we did receive comments from the City of Sacramento staff on the revised metrics. And while the Transportation Committee moved the item forward, so the recommendation to approve both the draft final trail network and the prioritization framework, it's with the understanding that staff is going to continue to collaborate with the city to address their concerns and present on any revisions at the April board meeting. So with that in mind, in February, I shared a draft prioritization framework for input from you and from the Transportation Committee. And we also shared it with the Youth Leadership Academy to get input on how we could refine the draft that we were starting with. And we also worked with local agency staff and partners to get input on the metrics. So that second column in the prioritization framework to best identify if a project is going to be able to say yes or no to the questions asked underly. Oh, does this project support the regional goal of collaboration? So an overview of the expected prioritization plan. I mentioned that it's qualitative. It's all yes, no. We're trying to, one, not make it seem more scientific than it actually is, and two, to kind of level the playing field a little bit, since these different trails, these connections are across the region, they're all in very different states of their planning process. Some are just getting kicked around as a it could be pretty cool if, and then others are looking for their environmental clearance right now. And then others still are looking for construction funding for something that they've gone through all of the project development. So we wanted to acknowledge the different starting points that these different connections are in, and look first at the project's potential based on moving the regional network towards the plan goals and towards the metrics on regionalism. After you would look at that, you then move into the readiness assessment. What do these projects need to get to the next phase of their development, to get them one step closer to construction? And from there, we would look at what's in our action plan to focus regional efforts over the next 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and beyond. So based on input from many of our project partners, recognize that it's very difficult for one trail project to be everything to everyone, to be able to check the box for all 6 plan goals and for all 3 regionalism measures. It's just not something that usually works out that well, and is something that SACOG hears over and over again when we're talking about project performance. And we try to recognize that different projects have different strengths. So here you can see an example of 2 different paths to the same priority status, which is one project could support 2 of the goals under the realizing plan goals section, but have really strong regionalism potential. That one would be considered as highly as something that has very strong plan realization potential. So it's going to be able to move the needle on all of those different plan priorities that were raised up from local plans for regional for trails and for active modes connections. But maybe they don't have as strong of the regionalism metrics. So there are different ways that a project could rise to the top. And so after you would go through or we put the different connections in the network, and work with local staff on discussing the performance potential of the projects. The top band of projects would then move into that readiness assessment. So determining what it takes to help them get one step closer to being open for use. And in this, we continue to lead with engagement. I notice how resident input is the absolute first part that you're looking at when you're going to put a project forward. And that's not just because resident support is critical for project delivery. I mean, one of the ways that trail projects often languish is because there's resident opposition. But we also wanted to call attention to this because it's especially important with our goals to increase access for the lower income residents and the communities of color in the region. Many of our cities and our counties are working to develop better relationships with their underserved residents, and having a top-down planning effort would really move counter to their hard work. So I know that this looks really easy and you're imagining like, okay, I just got to get ready to walk, scoot, and roll. But I have to provide that note of caution that if you're just starting at the resident input phase, it's very likely that you have 10 to 15 years of work ahead before you get to walk, scoot, and roll on that fantastic trail connection. I know I really should find a better slide to end on that isn't so depressing. But I think it's just the realism speaking that this is not a trail network that we're going to be able to get completely built with all close to 800 miles of connections in the next 5 years. It's something that is going to take a longer and more sustained effort. And so what our next steps are I had mentioned the City of Sacramento comments before and how the Transportation Committee moved the item forward, but with the understanding that SACOG staff would continue to work with the city to resolve their concerns. And assuming that we're able to do that, we would be looking to adopt the trail network and the prioritization framework in April, and then lead to a grant wrap up adopting the prioritization in June. We are somewhat on a crunch timeline. This has been a very a longer planning process. We're closing in on our 3rd year, but all grants must come to an end so then we can start the next phase of implementation. So I don't know if there are any other questions on the prioritization framework or if we're all ready to call it a day.
Thank you, Victoria. Any questions or comments? I think you threw us all over the ledge when you said 10 to 15 years.
I need a different slide to end on.
That Thelma and Louise one, or something go off the side.
Well, at least we'll get closer if they don't have to like hit every one of those markers, right? So
This is true.
that, I mean, at least there's an opportunity to balance what those metrics are, right? So
Right.
I think that's good.
Agreed. And I feel lucky because we have a lot of trails where they're not all class 4, but I mean, we have an abundance of, not an abundance, we have a lot of options, but I know that's not the case everywhere else. Probably a little bit easier in some of the rural areas. All right, well, with that then, Victoria, thank you very much for today's presentation. Okay, moving on to reports. So committee reports from board members, anything that Any land use items that board members would like to share? Yes, Director Gayalda.
Yeah, just real quick, wanted to let you know, we are starting construction this month to open up additional portions of the former golf course trail. So our second phase of an additional couple miles will be starting. They say at the end of the rainy season, the one we didn't have, so that starts this month.
Great. Congratulations.
Thank you. We're so excited. We'll get you all out there to go cruising.
Definitely. Any other board members? All right, seeing none. We have item 6 was land use implementation activities. I think this is a receive and file. I don't even know if Dom's on.
Dove is not.
Gotcha, okay. All right, well, I'll encourage everyone to go over that item if you haven't already. And with that, any final comments from anybody?
No, it's really nice to be here though.
It is.
It
Good to see-
absolutely is.
Good to see everybody in person. It's so great. And we look forward to seeing everybody else tomorrow. Hopefully everyone's gonna be able to make it. So I'm really looking forward to that. All right, well, so with that, at, what is this here? 2:47, I will adjourn today's meeting. So thank you, everybody.
Nice to see y'all.
Bye.
Bye.